Jasmine's hands trembled as she clutched her boarding pass. Minutes ago, she'd been publicly humiliated, her first-class seat inexplicably downgraded. Now 200 strangers were refusing to let the plane take off until justice was served. The captain's voice crackled overhead, final warning. Before we dive into this incredible true story of courage and solidarity, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Hit that like button if you've ever witnessed discrimination, and subscribe to join our community. Fighting for justice. Now let's rewind to see how this extraordinary moment came to be. The morning sun filtered through the blinds of the Washington family home in Atlanta as Jasmine carefully packed her carry-on luggage. Today marked a significant milestone in her young life. Her first solo trip to New York City. The journey wasn't just any vacation. It represented her growing independence and a glimpse into her future. In just 3 months, she would be starting her freshman year at Columbia University, her dream school since childhood. At 17, Jasmine Washington was already an accomplished young woman. Her bedroom walls displayed certificates and trophies from violin competitions dating back to 4th grade. The debate team captain's pin rested on her desk next to her acceptance letter from Columbia, which offered her a partial scholarship based on academic merit. Her parents couldn't have been prouder. "You sure you've got everything?" her father, Richard Washington, asked from her doorway. A high school principal with kind eyes and a firm handshake. He had raised Jasmine to be confident but cautious. "Yes, Dad," Jasmine smiled, zipping her suitcase closed. "Passport, wallet, phone charger, campus visit, itinerary, all checked 3 times. Her mother, Kendra, appeared behind her father holding a small gift bag. "Your father and I wanted to surprise you with something special for your trip." She handed Jasmine the bag with a warm smile. Inside, Jasmine found a boarding pass in a decorative holder. Her eyes widened as she read the details. "First class, Mom, Dad. This is too much." "Nothing's too much for our star," Richard said. "You've worked so hard and we're so proud of you. Consider it an early graduation present." Kendra adjusted Jasmine's collar affectionately. "Besides, we want your first big trip to be memorable for all the right reasons." The ride to Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport was filled with last-minute advice and reminders. Jasmine absorbed it all patiently, though she'd researched everything about flying weeks in advance. That was her way. Thorough preparation for every new experience. "Text us when you land," Kendra reminded her as they pulled up to the departure's curb. "And remember, be aware of your surroundings at all times in the city," Richard added, helping with her luggage. "I will," Jasmine promised, hugging them both. "Thank you again for the ticket. I still can't believe I'll be flying first class." "You deserve it," her mother said, eyes glistening slightly. "Now go show New York what Atlanta's finest looks like." After checking in at the airline counter without incident, Jasmine made her way to the security checkpoint. She'd chosen her outfit carefully for the occasion, a crisp white blouse, navy blazer, and tailored pants. Professional but comfortable, elegant without being showy. Her hair was pulled back in a neat bun, accentuating her high cheekbones and bright, intelligent eyes. The security process went smoothly, and Jasmine found herself at the gate with time to spare. She observed the diverse crowd of travelers, business people tapping frantically on laptops, families corralling energetic children, solo travelers absorbed in books or phones. The atmosphere buzzed with the unique energy of an airport terminal, where thousands of individual journeys converged. As she waited, Jasmine noticed subtle differences in how various passengers were treated. The gate agents smiled more readily at certain people, engaged in friendly banter with others, while maintaining strictly professional courtesy with some. These were the small, almost imperceptible differences she'd been taught to recognize since childhood. Microaggressions that individually might seem insignificant, but collectively told a story of bias. Still, Jasmine remained optimistic. Her first-class ticket was a shield of sorts, a tangible symbol that she belonged in spaces often not designed with people who looked like her in mind. When the boarding announcement came, Jasmine gathered her belongings and joined the first-class line. She held her boarding pass confidently, excited for the premium experience ahead. The other passengers in line wore expensive watches and carried designer luggage. A few gave her curious glances, but Jasmine maintained her poise. This is just the beginning, she thought to herself as the line began to move. Colombia, New York, and then the world. Little did she know that her journey would take an unexpected turn before the plane even left the ground. "Boarding pass, please," the flight attendant requested as Jasmine reached the aircraft door. Her name tag read Heather Reynolds, and her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. Jasmine handed over her ticket with a polite smile. "Good morning." Heather's perfectly shaped eyebrows rose slightly as she examined the boarding pass. Her eyes flicked from the paper to Jasmine's face and back again. "First class." The question carried an unmistakable note of skepticism. "Yes," Jasmine replied, maintaining her composure despite the implication in the woman's tone. "And how did you acquire this ticket?" Heather asked, holding the boarding pass up to the light as if checking for a watermark. The question caught Jasmine off guard. "It was a gift from my parents," she explained, though she immediately felt a flare of irritation at having to justify her presence. "I see," Heather said, her lips pursed. "Would you mind stepping aside for a moment? I need to verify something." By now, other passengers were backing up in the jetway behind Jasmine. She felt her cheeks warm with embarrassment as she stepped to the side, conscious of curious glances from strangers. "Is there a problem?" she asked quietly. "Just procedure," Heather replied briskly. She picked up a phone and spoke in hushed tones while keeping her eyes fixed on Jasmine. Moments later, a gate agent hurried down the jetway. His name tag identified him as Marcus Townsend. "What seems to be the issue?" he asked, looking between Heather and Jasmine. "This young lady's ticket needs verification," Heather explained, handing the boarding pass to Marcus. Marcus examined the ticket and frowned. "May I see some identification, miss?" Jasmine produced her driver's license, her hand betraying a slight tremor. She was acutely aware of time passing, of the line of passengers now watching this unusual delay. "This all appears to be in order," Marcus said after a moment. Then, inexplicably, he added, "However, there seems to be a seating adjustment needed." He tapped rapidly on a small tablet he carried. "Seating adjustment." Jasmine echoed, confusion washing over her. "What does that mean?" "It means you've been reassigned to economy class seat 34B. Marcus stated matter-of-factly, printing a new boarding pass from a portable device. "But why?" Jasmine struggled to understand. "My parents purchased a first-class ticket specifically as a gift." "I'm afraid I don't have that information," Marcus replied, his tone suggesting the conversation was over. "These things happen. The system makes adjustments for balance and weight distribution." Before Jasmine could protest further, a middle-aged white man in an expensive suit approached the door. "Excuse me, is there a holdup?" he asked impatiently. Heather's demeanor transformed instantly. "Not at all, Mr. Cooper," she said warmly. "Your seat in first class is ready for you. 2A by the window, as requested." Jasmine felt as if she'd been slapped. "Wait, that's my seat," she said, her voice rising slightly. "I had 2A. Heather's smile hardened. "As Mr. Townsend explained, there's been a reassignment. We need you to proceed to your new seat in economy." "But there must be some mistake," Jasmine insisted, struggling to maintain her composure. "My boarding pass clearly shows first class." "Miss Washington," Marcus said firmly, "I suggest you accept the new assignment." Continuing to argue could be interpreted as disruptive behavior, and we have protocols for handling disruptions that might include removing passengers from the flight. The threat hung in the air between them. Jasmine thought of her campus visit, her parents' expectations, the non-refundable hotel reservation waiting in New York. She thought of all the preparation that had gone into this trip. "This is because I'm black, isn't it?" she said quietly, locking eyes with Heather. "That accusation is completely inappropriate," Heather snapped. "Now, are you going to accept your new seat, or shall I call security?" Mr. Cooper, who had been watching the exchange with mild interest, proceeded past them into the plane without comment. With no choice that wouldn't derail her entire trip, Jasmine accepted the new boarding pass, her vision blurring slightly with unshed tears. The humiliation burned in her chest as she walked through the first-class cabin past her original seat, where Mr. Cooper was already being offered a pre-flight beverage, and continued into the economy section. The narrow aisle seemed to stretch endlessly as she made her way toward the back of the plane. She felt the weight of stares from other passengers, imagining their curiosity, or worse, their pity. Row 34 was near the rear of the aircraft, just in front of the lavatories. The middle seat Jasmine had been reassigned to was between two strangers who barely acknowledged her as she squeezed past to take her place. As she stowed her bag under the seat in front of her, Jasmine struggled to process what had just happened. The excitement and pride she'd felt earlier had been replaced by a familiar sensation, the sharp sting of discrimination, wrapped in a veneer of policy and procedure. She'd experienced variations of this treatment before, but never so blatantly, never in a situation where she held proof of her right to be somewhere in her hand. Jasmine took a deep breath and straightened her shoulders. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing her break down. She'd get through this flight, complete her campus visit, and then decide what action to take. Perhaps her parents could contact the airline's customer service once she landed. What she didn't know was that someone had been watching the entire incident unfold. Someone who wasn't willing to let it pass unchallenged. Diana Reeves had been standing 3 people behind Jasmine in the boarding line. A corporate attorney with 20 years of experience, Diana had developed an eye for injustice and the backbone to confront it. As she witnessed the interaction between Jasmine, Heather, and Marcus, alarm bells rang in her head. The white-haired woman in her mid-50s observed how the situation unfolded, noting the stark contrast between the treatment of the young black woman and the businessman who took her seat. Diana had traveled enough to know that last-minute seat changes happened, but they were typically accompanied by clear explanations, apologies, and often compensation. None of that had occurred here. As Diana took her own seat in economy, plus several rows ahead of where Jasmine had been relegated, she found herself unable to settle in. The incident nagged at her conscience. She thought of her own daughter, now 25, and working in Seattle, who had faced bias in her engineering program. She recalled her advice to her daughter back then: sometimes people will look the other way. Don't be one of them. After the safety demonstration, once the seatbelt sign had been turned off, Diana made her decision. She unfastened her belt and walked toward the back of the plane. Locating row 34, she found Jasmine staring blankly at the seat back pocket in front of her. "Excuse me," Diana said gently. "I couldn't help but notice what happened during boarding. May I speak with you for a moment?" Jasmine looked up, surprise evident on her face. Sure." Diana crouched in the aisle beside Jasmine's row. "I'm Diana Reeves," she introduced herself. "I saw them take your first-class seat, and something about it didn't sit right with me." "Would you mind telling me your side of what happened?" Jasmine hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. "It's fine, really. These things happen, I guess." "Do they?" Diana pressed gently. "Because in my experience, when airlines need to downgrade passengers, they typically offer compensation and a clear explanation." Jasmine's carefully maintained composure wavered slightly. "They didn't offer anything. Just told me it was a system adjustment and threatened to remove me from the flight when I questioned it." "May I see your original boarding pass?" Diana asked. Jasmine reached into her blazer pocket and produced the first boarding pass still in the decorative holder her parents had presented it in. Diana examined it carefully. "This is a valid first-class ticket," Diana confirmed. "Purchased and paid for, not an upgrade or standby assignment." "It was a graduation gift from my parents," Jasmine explained, her voice barely audible over the drone of the engines. "My first time flying first class." Diana felt a surge of indignation. "Would you like me to help you address this situation?" "I'm an attorney, and while this isn't my specific area of practice, I know enough about passenger rights to recognize when they're being violated." Jasmine glanced nervously toward the front of the plane. "I don't want to cause trouble. I have an important campus visit tomorrow." "I understand," Diana nodded. "But this isn't about causing trouble. It's about standing up for what's right. At minimum, you deserve compensation and an apology." After a moment's consideration, Jasmine nodded. "What would you suggest doing?" "First, let's try the direct approach," Diana said. She pressed the call button above Jasmine's seat. A different flight attendant responded, a younger man whose name tag read Carlos. Diana explained the situation succinctly, emphasizing the valid first-class ticket and the lack of explanation or compensation. Carlos frowned. I wasn't aware of this situation. Let me check with the lead flight attendant. He returned several minutes later with Heather Reynolds in tow. Heather's expression hardened when she recognized Jasmine. Is there a problem here? She asked coolly. Yes, there is, Diana replied, matching Heather's tone. This young woman was inappropriately downgraded without explanation or compensation, despite having a valid first-class ticket purchased weeks ago. Heather's eyes narrowed. As we explained to Miss Washington, seat assignments are subject to change based on operational needs. What specific operational need required her downgrade, but allowed another passenger to take her exact seat? Diana pressed. I'm not at liberty to discuss other passengers, Heather replied stiffly. If Miss Washington wishes to file a complaint, she can do so through customer service after we land. That's not good enough, Diana stated firmly. At minimum, she's entitled to a refund of the fare difference between first class and economy, plus appropriate compensation for the inconvenience. I'll have the purser bring a voucher for a future flight, Heather offered, clearly hoping to end the conversation. That doesn't address the current situation, Diana pointed out. Her parents paid for a first-class experience today, not a promise of one on some future date. Carlos, who had been listening to the exchange, interjected. Maybe we could check if there are any remaining seats in first class. Sometimes passengers don't show up. All seats in first class are occupied, Heather said sharply. Now, if there's nothing else, we need to prepare for beverage service. As Heather walked away, Diana took out her phone and snapped photos of Jasmine's original boarding pass and the new one she'd been issued. What are you doing? Jasmine asked. Documenting everything, Diana replied. And I'm not done yet. This isn't just poor customer service. This is discrimination. And they're hoping we'll just accept it quietly. Diana returned to her seat momentarily to retrieve her tablet from her carry-on. Back at Jasmine's row, she pulled up the airline's passenger rights document and customer commitment statement. Just as I thought, she murmured after scanning the text. The airline's own policy states that involuntary downgrades require immediate compensation, equal to the fare difference plus additional compensation for inconvenience. Jasmine read the section Diana indicated and frowned. They completely ignored their own policy. Yes, they did, Diana agreed. And I strongly suspect the reason has nothing to do with operational needs. Tell me, did you notice how quickly they seated that businessman in your original seat? Mr. Cooper. Jasmine nodded. They knew his name before checking his boarding pass, and they were much friendlier to him. Diana's suspicions deepened. This isn't just about getting you proper compensation, Jasmine. This is about ensuring that what happened to you doesn't happen to someone else next week or next month. What are you suggesting, Jasmine? Asked a mixture of hope and apprehension in her voice. I'm suggesting that we need more advocates, Diana replied, a determined glint in her eye. And I believe there are about 200 potential allies sitting on this plane with us. As Diana began formulating a plan, neither woman could have anticipated how quickly their cause would gain momentum or how a routine commercial flight was about to become a powerful demonstration of solidarity against injustice. Diana began her campaign methodically the way she approached her legal cases. First, identify potential allies. Second, present them with irrefutable evidence. Third, propose a clear course of action. She started with the passengers in Jasmine's immediate vicinity who had overheard their conversation with the flight attendants. The woman across the aisle, a university professor named Amara Taylor, expressed immediate support. I've seen this happen before, Amara whispered. Not always with seats, but the pattern is unmistakable. Diana then approached a gray-haired man 2 rows ahead who had been watching their interaction with interest. He introduced himself as Trevor Martinez, a retired civil rights attorney. I spent 30 years fighting cases exactly like this one, he told them, his voice carrying the slight rasp of age but losing none of its intensity. The key is documentation and witnesses. You've started with the documentation. I'll be your first witness. As the beverage service progressed through the cabin, Diana used the opportunity to speak quietly with more passengers. Eleanor Chen, a social media influencer with over 1 million followers, offered to document the situation discreetly on her platforms. Samuel Jackson, a retired Marine with ramrod-straight posture and a firm handshake, volunteered to speak with the flight crew soldier to soldier. "I've faced enough discrimination in my time to know it when I see it," Samuel said, his voice steady and determined. "And I wasn't raised to stand by when someone's being mistreated." What began as individual conversations soon evolved into a network of whispers spreading throughout the economy cabin. Passengers leaned across aisles and turned in their seats to discuss what they'd heard. Many asked to see Jasmine's original boarding pass, examining the evidence for themselves. The flight attendants noticed the unusual level of interaction among passengers. Carlos paused while handing out pretzels, his eyes tracking the movement of people between rows, the huddles of conversation that dispersed when he approached. "Something's going on," he murmured to a colleague. Heather Reynolds marched down the aisle, her practiced smile barely concealing her irritation. "Please return to your seats," she announced. "For safety reasons, we need to keep the aisles clear." Diana approached her directly. "We're simply having conversations," she said calmly. "Last I checked, that wasn't against any FAA regulations." "It is when it disrupts the cabin environment," Heather countered. "The only disruption was caused by your discriminatory treatment of a paying first-class passenger," Trevor Martinez interjected, standing from his seat. "As someone familiar with both airline regulations and civil rights law, I can assure you that what we're doing is perfectly legal." Other passengers began to voice their support. The atmosphere in the cabin shifted perceptibly as more people became aware of what had happened to Jasmine. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing some turbulence ahead. Please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts." Diana exchanged glances with Trevor. There was no turbulence visible outside the windows, and the seatbelt sign hadn't illuminated. It was a transparent attempt to quell the growing unrest. When the tactic failed to disperse the conversations, Rachel Henderson, the cabin supervisor, emerged from behind the first-class curtain. Her expression was stern as she approached Diana. "Ma'am, I understand you're creating a disturbance," she began. Actually, Eleanor Chen interrupted her phone recording discreetly. "We're having a civil discussion about a passenger's rights being violated. Would you care to comment on why this young woman was removed from her rightful first-class seat without explanation or compensation?" Rachel glanced at the phone, then at the growing number of attentive faces watching the interaction. "This is not an appropriate forum for such discussions. If the passenger has concerns, customer service will be happy to address them after we land." "That's not good enough," Samuel Jackson stated, rising to his full imposing height. "I've flown this airline for 30 years, and I've never seen such blatant disregard for a passenger's dignity. We deserve answers now, not platitudes about customer service." The pilot made another announcement. "Flight attendants, prepare for departure." Diana seized the moment. "Before we take off," she announced, her voice carrying throughout the cabin, "I have a question for everyone here. How many of you believe that all passengers should be treated with equal respect regardless of their age, gender, or the color of their skin?" Hands rose throughout the cabin. Dozens, then scores of them. Rachel Henderson's face paled as she witnessed the overwhelming response. "And how many of you believe that when an airline makes a mistake, they should acknowledge it and make it right?" Again, a forest of hands shot up. Even passengers who hadn't been part of the earlier conversations were now engaged, sensing the importance of the moment. "We're not asking for special treatment," Diana continued. "We're asking for equal treatment, and for this airline to honor its own stated policies." Jasmine Washington had a valid first-class ticket purchased by her parents as a graduation gift. She was humiliated and downgraded without explanation or compensation, while another passenger was given her seat with a smile. A murmur of disapproval rippled through the cabin. "What do you want us to do?" Rachel asked, visibly uncomfortable as she became aware of the united front forming against the airline's actions. Diana looked around at the faces turned toward her, strangers united by a common sense of justice, and made a bold proposal. "We want Jasmine restored to her rightful seat in first class with a formal apology." We want the airline to acknowledge that what happened was wrong and commit to reviewing its practices to ensure it doesn't happen again." "That's not possible," Rachel protested. "First class is full and we need to depart." "Then here's what we'll do," Trevor Martinez announced, standing beside Diana. "None of us will fasten our seatbelts until this situation is resolved fairly. No seatbelts, no takeoff. It's that simple." A chorus of agreement echoed through the cabin. Rachel looked from face to face, realizing that this was no longer about one passenger, but had evolved into something much larger. "I'll need to speak with the captain," she said, finally retreating toward the front of the plane. As she disappeared behind the curtain, Diana turned to Jasmine, who had watched the proceedings with a mixture of awe and apprehension. "Are you okay with this?" Diana asked quietly. "It's your fight, and we're following your lead." Jasmine took a deep breath, straightening her shoulders. "I'm scared," she admitted. "But yes, this isn't just about a seat anymore. It's about standing up for what's right, even when it's difficult." Diana squeezed her hand reassuringly. "You're not standing alone. Have you ever witnessed a moment when strangers came together to stand against injustice? Comment number 1 if you believe what these passengers did was right. Or comment number 2 if you think they should have handled it differently. Hit that like button if you've ever had to make a stand for what's right, and subscribe to hear more stories of everyday heroes challenging discrimination. What happens when corporate power meets people power? Will the airline cave to the pressure or double down on their decision? As the standoff intensifies, Jasmine will face choices that could change the course of her life. Stay with us as the tension builds in the next part of this extraordinary true story. The atmosphere on the plane transformed from the usual pre-flight tedium to electric anticipation. Rachel Henderson returned from the cockpit, her face tight with strain. Behind her came a man in a pilot's uniform, 4 gold stripes on his shoulders, identifying him as the captain. "Ladies and gentlemen," he addressed the cabin, his voice carrying the authority of someone used to being obeyed. "I'm Captain James Wilson. I understand there's a situation that needs resolving, but I must insist that all passengers comply with safety regulations immediately. We're third in line for takeoff, and any delay affects hundreds of other travelers." Diana stood her ground. "We understand, Captain, and we don't take this action lightly. However, we've witnessed a clear injustice that your crew has refused to address appropriately." "Ma'am, whatever the issue is, this isn't the proper way to handle it," the captain replied. Trevor Martinez stepped forward. "With all due respect, Captain, when conventional channels fail, civil disobedience becomes a necessary response. We've attempted to address this through your crew and been dismissed." The captain's eyes scanned the cabin, noting the numerous unbuckled seatbelts and resolute expressions. "What exactly is the nature of the complaint?" Diana explained the situation concisely, pointing out Jasmine's original first-class boarding pass, the unexplained downgrade, and the lack of compensation or proper explanation. "I see," the captain said, after a moment. "Rachel, could you verify this information?" Rachel shifted uncomfortably. "There was a seating adjustment made at the gate. I wasn't directly involved. The adjustment was made after I was already on the plane with a valid first-class boarding pass." Jasmine clarified, finding her voice. "And when I asked why, I was threatened with removal from the flight." The captain frowned. "That's not our standard procedure for handling downgrades." "No, it's not," agreed Trevor, which raises questions about why this particular passenger was singled out for such treatment. As they spoke, Heather Reynolds emerged from the first-class cabin, followed by Marcus Townsend, who had apparently boarded the plane after the initial incident. Their presence added fuel to the already tense situation. "We need to prepare for takeoff," Heather insisted. "This discussion can continue once we're airborne." "Actually, it can't," Samuel Jackson interjected. "FAA regulations require passengers to remain seated with seatbelts fastened during flight. If you force this issue now, you'll have over 100 unbuckled passengers, which creates a far greater safety concern than a delayed departure." The impasse was clear. The airline staff huddled together, speaking in hushed tones, while passengers continued to communicate across the cabin. Someone in row 22 had started a group text among nearby passengers to coordinate their response. Another passenger was on the phone with a relative who worked for a news station in Atlanta. They're trying to identify the ringleaders, Eleanor Chen warned after observing the crew's whispered conference. Standard tactic: isolate the perceived troublemakers and pressure them individually. Sure enough, Rachel soon approached with a list in hand. Miss Reeves, Mr. Martinez, Miss Chen, and Mr. Jackson, the captain would like to speak with you privately. Divide and conquer won't work here, Diana replied calmly. Whatever needs to be said can be said in front of everyone. Rachel's professional demeanor cracked slightly. This is becoming a security issue. If necessary, we'll have law enforcement meet the aircraft. Go ahead, Trevor responded. I'd be fascinated to explain to them how an airline violated its own policies and then threatened passengers who peacefully objected. As the standoff continued, the plane remained stationary at the gate. The flight's status on the airport's systems changed from boarding to delayed. Passengers in the terminal waiting for the next flight began to notice the unusual holdup. Inside the aircraft, Heather made another attempt to resolve the situation by approaching Jasmine directly. Miss Washington, we apologize for any misunderstanding, she said, her tone artificially sweet. We can offer you a voucher for a future flight plus a complimentary beverage service during this trip. Jasmine looked to Diana and Trevor, who both subtly shook their heads. That doesn't address the actual issue, Jasmine replied, surprising herself with her steady voice. I had a confirmed first-class seat that was taken from me without explanation after I boarded. A voucher doesn't fix that. What exactly do you want? Heather asked, exasperation bleeding through her professional veneer. What I paid for, Jasmine answered simply. What my parents bought as a gift to celebrate my hard work. The cabin supervisor's phone buzzed. She checked the message and blanched slightly. Excuse me, she said, abruptly retreating to the galley area. Eleanor leaned over from her seat. Something's happening. The hashtag number Justice for Jasmine is starting to trend locally. Some of the passengers have been texting family members who are sharing the story. Outside the plane's windows, they could see airport staff gathering along with what appeared to be airline management personnel in corporate attire. A news van had pulled up near the terminal building. They're escalating to corporate crisis management, Diana observed. This is no longer just about one flight. Carlos, who had remained sympathetic throughout the confrontation, approached Jasmine with a bottle of water. Just so you know, he whispered as he handed it to her, the guy in your seat is Bradley Cooper. Not the actor, he clarified quickly, but the vice president's son-in-law. They bumped you for him. Jasmine's eyes widened at this revelation. So it had nothing to do with operational needs? Nothing at all, Carlos confirmed, before being called away by Heather's sharp voice. The captain made another announcement. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your final warning. Interfering with crew member duties is a federal offense. I must insist that all passengers fasten their seatbelts immediately so we can proceed with departure. No one moved to comply. Instead, Samuel Jackson stood up. Captain, with respect, we are not interfering with duties. We are declining to participate in an unjust situation. There's a difference. Amara Taylor, the university professor, added her voice. This is a teachable moment, Captain. How your airline responds will demonstrate either a commitment to equity or a willingness to perpetuate discriminatory practices. The pressure was building from all sides. Outside ground crew who would normally have disconnected the jetway and cleared the aircraft for pushback remained in position awaiting resolution. Inside, the solidarity among passengers was strengthening rather than fracturing under threats. Jasmine, who had started the day excited about her first solo journey, now found herself at the center of a civil rights demonstration. The weight of the moment pressed on her shoulders. The fear of repercussions battling with the knowledge that remaining silent in the face of injustice only ensured its continuation. Miss Washington. A new voice entered the fray. A man in an expensive suit had emerged from first class and was making his way down the aisle toward her seat. I'm Bradley Cooper. May I have a word? The tension in the cabin ratcheted higher. as all eyes turned to witness this unexpected confrontation between the displaced passenger and the man who had benefited from her displacement. In a glass-walled office at the airline's headquarters, CEO William Fairchild stared at the live feed on his tablet with mounting alarm. What had begun as a routine seat reassignment, the kind that happened hundreds of times daily across their network, had morphed into a full-blown PR crisis unfolding in real time. "How bad is it?" he asked, his communications director Serena Patel. "Bad and getting worse," Serena replied, scrolling through social media reports. "The hashtag number Justice for Jasmine is trending nationally now. We've got calls from CNN, MSNBC, and Fox News." The Washington Post just reached out for comment. Fairchild pinched the bridge of his nose. "And all this over a first-class seat. Couldn't the crew have just offered her an upgrade on a future flight and moved on?" "It's not just about the seat anymore," Serena explained. "It's about how she was treated. According to passenger reports, she was humiliated, threatened, and discriminated against. And now we have 200 passengers essentially staging a sit-in on her behalf. Get me a direct line to that aircraft," Fairchild ordered, "and assemble the executive team for an emergency meeting. We need to contain this before it completely spirals." Back on the plane, Bradley Cooper stood awkwardly in the aisle next to Jasmine's seat, acutely aware of dozens of eyes watching their interaction. "Miss Washington," he began again, his confidence faltering under the collective scrutiny. "I've just been made aware of the situation regarding the seating arrangement." "You mean how you were given my seat without explanation?" Jasmine responded, her voice steady despite her racing heart. Cooper shifted uncomfortably. "I want to be clear that I had no idea someone had been displaced for me. I was told my upgrade had been processed normally." Diana interjected, "Yet you must have noticed the commotion during boarding. You were present when Miss Washington was being questioned about her valid ticket." Cooper paused his expression, revealing the truth. He had noticed, but had chosen not to involve himself. "You're right. I should have asked questions. I apologize for my complicity, however passive." This unexpected acknowledgement created a ripple of murmurs throughout the cabin. Cooper continued addressing Jasmine directly. "I'd like to return the seat to you. It's rightfully yours." Before Jasmine could respond, Rachel Henderson intervened. "Mr. Cooper, that won't be necessary. We're working on a resolution that will satisfy everyone." "I believe Miss Washington should decide what would satisfy her," Cooper replied, surprising everyone with his sudden alignment with the protesters. Outside the aircraft, the situation was attracting more attention. Additional news vans had arrived, setting up near the terminal. Passengers waiting for other flights began recording videos and sharing them online, speculating about the unusual delay. Airport staff huddled in concerned groups, consulting tablets and phones. Inside the terminal, Richard and Kendra Washington rushed toward the gate, having received Jasmine's brief text about the situation. They were met by airline customer service representatives who had been dispatched to intercept them before they could reach the aircraft. "Mr. and Mrs. Washington," began a harried manager, "we understand your concern, but I assure you we're handling the situation with your daughter." Handling it how Richard demanded, by threatening to remove her from a flight after taking away the seat we paid for. "There's been a misunderstanding," the manager insisted. "We're offering compensation and—" "We don't want compensation," Kendra interrupted firmly. "We want our daughter treated with dignity and respect." Back on the plane, the cabin supervisor's phone rang. She answered, listening intently before her expression shifted to one of surprise tinged with dismay. "Yes, sir," she said, her voice carrying in the tense silence. "I understand. Right away." She ended the call and turned to her crew, speaking in hushed tones. Heather's face reddened with indignation, while Marcus appeared increasingly uncomfortable. "What's happening, Jasmine?" asked Diana. "I believe the corporate office has just entered the game," Diana replied quietly. "When public pressure mounts, executives tend to intervene directly." The cabin supervisor approached their section again, her demeanor noticeably altered. "Miss Washington, I've been instructed to offer our sincere apologies for the misunderstanding regarding your seating assignment. We would like to return you to your original seat in first class immediately." Diana narrowed her eyes. "That's a start. What about acknowledgement of the discriminatory treatment she received? There was no discrimination involved, the supervisor insisted automatically. This was a computer error that our gate staff mishandled. Eleanor Chen, who had been documenting the entire interaction, laughed incredulously. A computer error that somehow only affected the one black passenger in first class. That's quite a specific glitch. Samuel Jackson stood again. We're not accepting that explanation. Not when your flight attendant specifically questioned how she acquired her ticket and threatened to remove her for simply asking why she was being downgraded. The pressure was mounting from all sides. Outside the aircraft, airline executives had arrived at the gate, conferring urgently with airport management. Inside, the unity among passengers remained unbroken, with people from all backgrounds standing firm in their demand for justice. The cabin supervisor's phone rang again. This time, when she answered, her face went completely pale. "Yes, Mr. Fairchild, I understand." "Yes, sir." "Right away." She ended the call and turned to her crew, visibly shaken. That was the CEO, she informed them quietly, though in the hushed cabin many passengers overheard. "He wants this resolved immediately. Full restoration of the original seat, formal apology, additional compensation, and," she hesitated, clearly uncomfortable, "an acknowledgement that proper procedures weren't followed." Heather Reynolds protested immediately. "Rachel, you can't be serious. We followed procedure for irregular operations." "Not according to the internal communications I just received," Rachel replied tensely. "The reseating wasn't logged properly, no compensation was offered at the time of downgrade, and there's no record of an operational necessity requiring the change." As this exchange occurred, Trevor Martinez was reviewing something on his phone with increasing interest. He beckoned to Diana and showed her the screen. "Look at this," he said quietly. Someone leaked an internal airline document to a journalist. It shows guidelines for passenger profiling to identify potential upgrade candidates and downgrade risks. Diana scanned the document, her expression hardening. This explicitly lists young travelers not in business attire as prime candidates for downgrade if premium cabin space is needed. The racial coding isn't explicit, but the impact is clear from the examples provided. The leak spread rapidly through social media, adding fuel to the already blazing controversy. Passenger phones throughout the cabin lit up with notifications as the story gained momentum. In a last, desperate attempt to contain the situation, the airline offered increasingly valuable compensation packages, vouchers for future flights, frequent flyer miles, even full refunds for the current journey. "We don't want bribes," Diana stated firmly. "We want accountability." Meanwhile, Jasmine's parents had managed to reach the gate, where they were now visible through the aircraft windows, engaged in heated conversation with airline officials. The sight of her parents fighting for her galvanized Jasmine's resolve. "I've made my decision," she announced, standing to address the cabin supervisor directly. "I'll return to my original seat, as is my right, but only after Heather and Marcus apologize publicly for how they treated me." A hush fell over the cabin as all eyes turned to the crew members in question. The mandate from corporate headquarters hung in the air, along with the unspoken understanding that their jobs might depend on their next actions. As the standoff entered its third hour, the initial surge of adrenaline that had carried Jasmine through the confrontation began to wane. The reality of her situation pressed in from all sides. What had started as an exciting journey toward her future had transformed into a public spectacle with her at its center. While Diana and Trevor continued negotiations with airline representatives who had boarded the plane, Jasmine retreated into herself, questioning her choices. The weight of unwanted attention felt suffocating. Dozens of strangers were now invested in her story, their phones documenting every development, their expectations adding pressure to her already burdened shoulders. She gazed out the small window beside her seat companion, watching airport workers scurry about on the tarmac below. What would happen once this immediate crisis passed? Would there be repercussions for her stand against injustice? How would this affect her college experience if she arrived at Columbia preceded by viral fame as the center of a discrimination case? These questions tumbled through her mind, accompanied by memories of previous encounters with bias. Subtler incidents she had weathered without public notice. The teacher who had questioned her authorship of a particularly insightful essay. The store security guard who had followed her through departments while ignoring her white friends. The college interviewer who had seemed surprised by her articulate responses and perfect SAT scores. Each of those moments had been a private battle, fought alone or with the quiet support of her parents. This time was different. Hundreds of strangers had invested themselves in her fight, risking their own travel plans and comfort in solidarity with her cause. Her phone vibrated with a text from her mother. "We're trying to get on the plane. Are you okay? We're so proud of you. Love you." Tears welled in Jasmine's eyes as she typed her response. "I'm scared, Mom. What if this follows me to Colombia? What if it makes things harder instead of better?" The reply came swiftly. "Standing up for yourself never makes things harder in the long run, even when it feels that way in the moment. Your father and I are right here with you. Whatever you decide to do next, we support you." Diana returned to Jasmine's side, noticing her emotional state. "How are you holding up?" she asked gently. "I'm not sure," Jasmine admitted. "Part of me wants to accept whatever apology they offer just to end this and get to New York. Another part knows that would be letting them off too easily." Diana nodded understandingly. "It's an incredible burden to become a symbol in a fight for justice, especially when you didn't ask for that role. Whatever you decide, you've already shown remarkable courage." As they spoke, an elderly black man from several rows ahead made his way down the aisle. He moved slowly, leaning on a cane, his aged face lined with the wisdom of years. "Miss Washington," he inquired, his voice carrying the rich timbre of the Deep South. "My name is Joseph Freeman. I wonder if I might share something with you." Jasmine nodded, and the man continued. "In 1961, I was part of the Freedom Rides through Alabama," he said quietly. "We faced beatings, arrests, and threats for simply trying to use the facilities we had a legal right to use. Many people told us to be patient, to wait for a more convenient time to accept small concessions rather than demand full equality." He paused, his gaze both gentle and penetrating. "The thing about injustice is that it relies on our silence and our willingness to compromise. Every time someone stands firm, even in what might seem a small matter, it weakens the foundation of the entire unjust system." Jasmine absorbed his words, feeling their weight and truth. "But so many people are being delayed because of me," she said. "Is my seat worth all this disruption?" "It's not about the seat," Joseph replied with quiet certainty. "It's about your dignity. It's about the message sent when they decided you didn't belong in that space, while someone else did. That message affects not just you, but everyone who looks like you, who might board this airline tomorrow or next year." A flight attendant approached, indicating that Joseph should return to his seat, but he had one final thought to share. "Whatever you decide, make the choice that lets you look in the mirror tomorrow with peace in your heart, not the choice that makes others comfortable." As Joseph made his way back to his seat, the captain's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Wilson again. I've just been informed that we've lost our departure slot. We're now looking at a minimum 2-hour delay before we can be rescheduled for takeoff, assuming we resolve the current situation." A collective groan rose from some passengers, but remarkably there was no animosity directed toward Jasmine. Instead, several people called out encouragement. "Stay strong, we're with you, don't back down." Drawing strength from this support and Joseph's wisdom, Jasmine stood. The cabin quieted as she made her way to the front of the economy section where airline representatives were still conferring. "Excuse me," she said, her voice stronger than she expected. "I'd like to address everyone if that's possible." Rachel Henderson hesitated, then nodded to Carlos, who handed Jasmine the intercom phone. "Hello, Jasmine," began her voice carrying throughout the aircraft. "My name is Jasmine Washington. Most of you know by now that I was removed from my first-class seat without explanation or compensation after boarding with a valid ticket." She paused, gathering her thoughts before continuing. "I want to thank all of you for your incredible support. I never expected strangers to stand up for me like this, and it means more than I can express. The cabin remained silent, passengers listening intently. "This isn't just about a seat or about me personally," Jasmine continued. "It's about a pattern where some people are deemed less worthy of dignity and respect than others. It's about arbitrary rules that somehow only apply to certain individuals." Her voice grew stronger as she spoke. "I don't want special treatment. I just want the treatment I paid for the experience my parents saved to give me as a graduation gift. And I want assurance that the next person who looks like me won't face the same discrimination." She directed her gaze toward the airline staff. "I'm not asking for anything extraordinary. I'm asking for accountability, transparency, and a commitment to do better. Not just for me, but for everyone." The profound silence that followed her words spoke volumes. Then, gradually, applause spread through the cabin, starting with Diana and Trevor, then Eleanor and Samuel, until nearly every passenger was clapping in support. In that moment, surrounded by the affirmation of strangers, Jasmine felt the doubts that had plagued her begin to recede. Whatever came next, she would face it with the knowledge that standing up for dignity was always the right choice, regardless of the personal cost. The airline representatives exchanged glances, recognizing that this situation had evolved far beyond a simple seating dispute. What they faced now was a defining moment for their company's reputation and values, one that would require more than token gestures to resolve. The applause following Jasmine's speech had barely subsided when Rachel Henderson's phone rang again. She answered, listening intently before her expression registered shock. "Yes, sir," she said. "I'll put it on speaker." She pressed a button, then held up the phone. "This is William Fairchild, CEO of Meridian Airlines," announced a deep, authoritative voice that carried throughout the now silent cabin. "Am I speaking to the aircraft?" "Yes, Mr. Fairchild," Rachel confirmed. "You're on speakerphone in the main cabin." "Good. First, I want to apologize to all passengers on Flight 1372 for the delay and inconvenience you're experiencing. I've been fully briefed on the situation regarding Miss Jasmine Washington's seating assignment, and I want to address it directly." Jasmine felt a surge of anticipation mixed with apprehension. The CEO of a major airline was speaking directly to this flight because of her. "Miss Washington, are you able to hear me?" Fairchild asked. "Yes, sir," Jasmine replied, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Miss Washington, on behalf of Meridian Airlines, I extend our sincerest apologies for the treatment you received today. There is no excuse for how our staff handled your valid first-class ticket. What happened was contrary to our policies, our values, and basic human dignity." The forthright acknowledgement surprised everyone, especially the airline staff, whose expressions ranged from shock to discomfort. "Furthermore," Fairchild continued, "I want to be clear that what occurred was not merely a procedural error, but reflects deeper issues that we as a company must address. The selective application of policies based on perceived status or background is unacceptable in any context, but especially in our increasingly diverse society." Eleanor Chen, who had been documenting everything, exchanged glances with Diana. This was no generic corporate apology, but a specific acknowledgement of the discriminatory nature of the incident. "Effective immediately," Fairchild announced, "I've instructed our ground staff to restore Miss Washington to her original first-class seat. Additionally, I've initiated a comprehensive review of our seating policies and staff training protocols to prevent similar incidents in the future." Bradley Cooper, who had remained in the first-class cabin after his earlier attempt to return the seat, stood up and moved toward the intercom. "Mr. Fairchild," he said when Rachel reluctantly handed him the phone, "this is Bradley Cooper. I was given Miss Washington's seat, apparently due to my connection to VP Operations Jonathan Mercer. I want to publicly surrender that seat and join those calling for accountability." This unexpected development sent another wave of murmurs through the cabin. "Mr. Cooper, I appreciate your integrity," Fairchild responded after a brief pause. "And I assure you and everyone on board that any preferential treatment based on personal connections is not condoned by our corporate leadership. Those responsible will be held accountable." As these events unfolded, a more dramatic scene was developing behind the scenes. Media pressure had intensified exponentially in the past hour. Major networks were running breaking news alerts about the standoff. Corporate sponsors had begun calling the airline's headquarters concerned about their brands being associated with discrimination. Most damaging of all, a whistleblower within the airline's IT department had leaked details about an algorithmic system used for passenger management that flagged certain demographic profiles for potential downgrade when premium cabins needed adjustment. Though never explicitly coded for racial bias, the system's parameters had produced exactly that effect in practice. The revelation had thrown the company into crisis mode. The board of directors had convened an emergency meeting, overriding Fairchild's initial strategy of minimal acknowledgement and pushing for a more definitive response. Back on the aircraft, Fairchild was concluding his address. "I've instructed our team to provide full refunds to all passengers on today's flight, plus additional compensation for the delay. For Miss Washington specifically, we're offering a comprehensive package that includes a full refund, complimentary first-class tickets for future travel, and our commitment to use this incident as a catalyst for meaningful change within our organization." The CEO's direct intervention marked a decisive shift in the standoff. Yet for many on board, including Diana and Trevor, the proposed resolution still focused too heavily on financial compensation rather than structural change. Mr. Fairchild, Diana spoke up. "While we appreciate your acknowledgement and apology, many of us are concerned about the systemic issues that allowed this to happen. What specific changes will Meridian implement to prevent similar discrimination in the future?" There was a moment of silence before Fairchild responded, "That's a fair question. In addition to reviewing our algorithms and protocols, we're committing to implementing implicit bias training for all customer-facing staff, establishing a diverse passenger advocacy council to review policies, and creating transparent reporting mechanisms for incidents like these." As he outlined these measures, Captain James Wilson emerged from the cockpit, a decision having formed in his mind. After 30 years with the airline, he had seen enough corporate crises to recognize that this one touched on fundamental values he personally held dear. "Mr. Fairchild, the captain, interjected as commanding officer of this aircraft. I believe there's one more step needed to properly resolve this situation. With your permission, I'd like to personally escort Miss Washington back to her rightful seat in first class, with the respect and dignity she deserved from the beginning." This unexpected gesture from the highest-ranking authority on the plane created a palpable shift in the atmosphere. Even Rachel Henderson, who had remained defensive throughout much of the confrontation, seemed to recognize the symbolic importance of this proposed action. Fairchild's voice came through the speaker once more. "Captain Wilson, I believe that would be entirely appropriate. Please proceed." The board members observing the situation remotely recognized that this moment represented more than crisis management. It was an opportunity to demonstrate genuine commitment to change. They unanimously supported the captain's initiative and approved a more comprehensive response than Fairchild had initially proposed. As Captain Wilson offered his arm to Jasmine in a gesture of formal courtesy, the passengers who had stood in solidarity with her broke into applause once more. The symbolic procession from the back of the plane to first class carried weight beyond the physical movement it represented, a public restoration of dignity and an acknowledgement of wrong. Bradley Cooper stood as they approached, gathering his belongings to vacate the disputed seat. "I'm sincerely sorry for my part in this," he said, meeting Jasmine's eyes directly. "I should have spoken up sooner." As Jasmine took her rightful place in Seat 2A, the gravity of what had transpired began to sink in. What had started as a personal humiliation had catalyzed a moment of collective action and corporate accountability. The passengers who had unified in her defense had demonstrated that justice could prevail when people chose to stand together against discrimination. Captain Wilson returned to the cabin intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've been cleared for our new departure time. Please ensure your seatbelts are fastened and tray tables are in their upright position. And thank you, all of you, for reminding us what it means to truly be fellow travelers on this journey." As the engines roared to life, Jasmine looked out the window at the airport where her journey had taken such an unexpected turn. The delay had been substantial, but the victory had been worth every minute. She had discovered a strength within herself she hadn't known existed, and witnessed firsthand the power of solidarity in the face of injustice. The plane began to taxi toward the runway, carrying not just passengers but participants, in a moment that would continue to resonate long after they reached their destination. The gleaming skyscrapers of Manhattan came into view as Flight 1372 made its final approach to JFK International Airport. For Jasmine Washington, gazing out the first-class window at the iconic skyline, the city represented more than just the location of her future university. It now symbolized a personal transformation that had occurred at 35,000 feet. The remainder of the flight had unfolded in stark contrast to its tumultuous beginning. The first-class cabin crew, led by a different attendant who had come aboard before departure, had provided impeccable service, treating Jasmine with the deference and respect that should have been her experience from the start. "Miss Washington, would you care for another beverage before we land?" asked the flight attendant Carlos, who had been reassigned to first class after showing empathy during the conflict. "No thank you," Jasmine replied with a smile. "I'm all set." Throughout the 3-hour journey, passengers had visited her seat, some to share their own experiences with discrimination, others simply to express their admiration for her courage. What had begun as an isolating experience had transformed into an unexpected community. Diana Reeves had moved to an empty seat nearby during the flight, using the time to mentor Jasmine on handling the media attention that would likely greet their arrival. "Remember, you control your narrative," she advised. "You decide which questions to answer and which parts of your story to share." As the plane descended, the captain's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're beginning our final approach to JFK. Local time is 5:47 p.m. and the temperature is 72 degrees Fahrenheit. On behalf of the entire crew, I want to thank you for your patience today and for demonstrating the best of humanity in challenging circumstances." When the aircraft finally reached the gate and the seatbelt sign switched off, passengers broke into spontaneous applause, not for the landing, but for the journey they had shared and the stand they had taken together. Jasmine was surprised to find herself escorted off the plane first, ahead of even the other first-class passengers. As she emerged from the jetway, she was greeted by an unexpected sight. Dozens of people gathered in the terminal, many holding homemade signs with messages like "Stand up for justice" and number "Justice for Jasmine." News cameras swiveled in her direction, reporters calling out questions. The story had indeed gone viral during their flight, capturing the attention of traditional media and social platforms alike. Beside her, Diana provided a steadying presence. "You don't have to speak to them if you don't want to," she reminded Jasmine. "This is your moment to use or decline as you see fit." After a moment's consideration, Jasmine stepped forward. With poise beyond her 17 years, she delivered a brief statement thanking her fellow passengers for their solidarity and expressing hope that her experience would lead to meaningful changes in how all travelers were treated. As she spoke, her phone buzzed with a notification. Columbia University's president had issued a statement praising her courage and inviting her to speak at an upcoming campus forum on activism and social justice. In the days that followed, the ripple effects of Flight 1372 continued to spread. True to CEO Fairchild's word, Meridian Airlines announced a comprehensive overhaul of its seating policies, including the elimination of algorithmic systems found to produce biased outcomes and the implementation of mandatory algorithmic system anti-discrimination training for all staff. Heather Reynolds and Marcus Townsend were placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation. More significantly, the airline created a new executive position, Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer, with a direct reporting line to the CEO and board. For Jasmine, the incident that might have derailed her college visit instead enhanced her introduction to academic life. During her campus tour the following day, professors and students alike recognized her from the news coverage, many expressing admiration for how she had handled herself under pressure. Diana Reeves, who had extended her New York stay to support Jasmine, proposed a mentorship relationship that transcended their chance meeting. "You have extraordinary potential," she told Jasmine over lunch near Columbia's campus. "I'd be honored to help guide you through law school if that's a path you're considering." The most unexpected development came 1 month later when Jasmine, now settled into her freshman year at Columbia, received an invitation to join a newly formed passenger rights advocacy group. Funded by a coalition of civil rights organizations, the group sought to address discriminatory practices across the transportation industry. "Your experience catalyzed a national conversation," the invitation letter explained. "We need your voice at the table as we push for systemic change." On the 1-year anniversary of Flight 1372, Jasmine found herself once again boarding a Meridian Airlines plane bound for Atlanta, this time to visit her parents during spring break. The difference was palpable from the moment she entered the terminal. Meridian's check-in counters now displayed prominent signage about passenger rights and non-discrimination policies. Staff training materials visible on computer screens highlighted proper protocols for handling seating changes. Most remarkable of all, Jasmine recognized several faces among her fellow passengers. Diana Trevor, Eleanor Samuel, and even Joseph Freeman had arranged to be on this commemorative flight, along with nearly 30 other veterans of the day. Original standoff. As they settled into their seats, all properly assigned without incident, Captain James Wilson's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, 1 year ago you taught an airline, and indeed a nation, an important lesson about standing together for dignity and respect. Today we fly not just as passengers, but as witnesses to the positive change that can come when ordinary people refuse to accept injustice." The plane took off smoothly into clear skies, carrying with it the legacy of a moment when strangers from all backgrounds had united around a simple principle that everyone deserves to be treated with equal dignity, regardless of who they bride, are, or how they look. For Jasmine Washington, gazing out at the clouds below, the journey that had begun in uncertainty and humiliation had led to a place of purpose and power. She had discovered not just her own voice, but the profound impact that voice could have when raised in the cause of justice. Jasmine's story teaches us that injustice thrives in silence, but falters in the face of solidarity. When Diana first spoke up, she couldn't have known that hundreds would join her stand or that their collective action would transform airline policy. This illustrates how small acts of courage can cascade into powerful movements for change. The incident highlights how discrimination often hides behind policies and procedures that are selectively enforced. It reveals the exhausting reality many face, constantly having to prove they belong in spaces others enter without question. Yet it also demonstrates that when witnesses choose action over comfort, systems can be held accountable. Perhaps most importantly, this story shows that change doesn't require extraordinary heroes, just ordinary people willing to recognize wrong and stand firmly for right. Trevor, Eleanor, Samuel, and countless unnamed passengers each contributed what they could: legal knowledge, social media reach, moral support, or simply refusing to buckle their seatbelts in solidarity. In a world where injustice often seems overwhelming, Jasmine's experience reminds us that collective action works. No single person alone could have changed the airline's practices, but together they created a moment that rippled into lasting transformation. When we choose to stand with those facing discrimination, we help build the just society we all deserve. What would you do if you witnessed discrimination happening right in front of you? Would you speak up like Diana, or remain silent like many initially did? Your actions in these pivotal moments define not just who you are, but the kind of society we create together. Leave a comment sharing a time when you stood up against injustice, or wish you had. Hit that like button if this story moved you. Subscribe for more powerful true stories of everyday heroes, and share this video with someone who needs to hear that standing up for what's right truly makes a difference. Thank you for joining me on this journey through one of the most inspiring passenger solidarity movements in aviation history. Until next time, Remember that change begins with the courage of a single voice, but transforms the world through the power of many voices united.